Wolfpack rescued a pregnant woman in a forest in winter. What happened to her shocked everyone. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Storyist. Today, I will tell you a story about a wolfpack who rescued a pregnant woman in a forest in the winter. What happened to her shocked everyone. Watch the video until the end to find out what happened. Our story today takes place a long time ago in a remote village in Norway during a very cold winter. Snow blanketed the ground and covered the trees of the nearby forest. There was a young woman living in the village who was pregnant. The young woman's husband was a fisherman and was away on his boat on a long fishing trip. It was his last trip of the year before the bay completely froze over. So he was going to stay out for several days to catch as many fish as he could. While he was away, it was up to the young woman to take care of the house. Even though she was due to have the baby soon, this young woman was very strong and got all the work done on her own. She even had to walk several miles through the woods every day to get fresh water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. She would make this trip for water at the end of the day, making sure that she was back before the sun went down. After the sun went down, it became too cold to be out in the forest, and there were dangerous animals to worry about too. On this particular day, everyone in the village was talking about the weather. The winds had picked up overnight, which usually meant a big snowstorm was coming in. All the fishermen would be returning that night to hunker down with their families until everything thawed out again in the spring. The young woman heard all the talk about the storm and was excited that her husband would be returning home that night. She put her hands on her belly and felt movement from within. "Oh, he couldn't come back a moment too soon," she thought to herself. "This baby will be coming any minute now." The young woman quickly set about tidying up the house in preparation for his arrival. "I know," she thought to herself. "I'll make a hot, delicious stew for dinner. That way, when my husband comes home out of the cold, we can share a nice hot meal. What better way to celebrate?" So after her usual daily work, the young woman went to the market to buy ingredients for the stew. While she was there, she felt a great movement in her belly. "Shh! Not yet," she whispered, rubbing her hands on her stomach. As though listening, the baby within was still again. Yet, the young woman knew, though, that the time was quickly approaching. It was a good thing that her husband would be getting home tonight. She paid for the ingredients, thanked the shopkeeper, and went home to drop off the food. Then the young woman set out with a bucket to get water for the stew. It was a little bit later in the evening than she usually set out, but she was confident as long as she hurried, she would be able to make it to the river and back before the sun went down and the snowstorm rolled in. And so, with one hand clutching her bucket, the other resting on her pregnant belly, the young woman made her way through the trees. She made it to the river with plenty of time left to get home, so when her belly started to shift and ache again, she took a moment to sit down on a large rock near the water's edge. The pains were more frequent now. "Just a little longer," she said aloud to herself. "Just wait a little longer." Realizing that she herself couldn't afford to wait, the young woman filled her bucket and started walking quickly back towards her home in the village. She could see that the sun was beginning to set. She didn't have much time. So when her belly began to ache again, suddenly, she pushed through. The pain was coming in waves, but she brushed each one aside and continued on. But finally, it became too much for her to bear. The young woman winced and cried out as her stomach spasmed, and she slipped on a rock on the path. She twisted her ankle badly and tumbled to the ground. She protected her stomach as she fell and landed on her side, but the bucket of water splashed all over her. Thoroughly soaked and shivering, the young woman carefully tried to stand up, but she couldn't put any weight on her ankle. The pain was too great. From where she was on the ground, she could see the sun disappearing over the horizon. She could feel the air getting colder as snow began to fall on her wet body. Her heart started to race. She knew that if she didn't get help soon, She and her unborn baby would die out here in the cold. But she was brave and wouldn't give up. She crawled as best as she could along the path back toward the village, calling out for help as loudly as she could. But it was no use. She was too far away, and everyone else was sheltered in for the night. She cried out once more, this time in pain, as her stomach spasmed again. But then she heard something that filled her with fear. Echoing through the trees was the howling of a pack of wolves, and they were getting closer. The young woman stopped moving and tried to be as quiet as possible. She curled herself up into a ball to try to hide under her cloak, but she knew that she was exposed out on the path. She could only hope and pray that the wolves would pass her by. She needed a miracle, and she needed it now. Just then, she felt a hot breath on the back of her neck. The wolves had found her! The young woman said a quick prayer for her unborn baby and prepared herself for the worst. But instead of attacking her, the wolf did the strangest thing. It settled down next to her in the snow. The rest of the wolves soon joined in, forming a warm fur barrier against the winter storm. She breathed a sigh of relief, but then winced in pain again as the contractions in her belly started to intensify. This wasn't over yet. Back at the village, her husband had returned home to an empty house. The fisherman knew that his wife must have gone out to get water and not returned, but it was too cold and dangerous to gather a search party to go look for her. He waited through the night, praying for her safety. As soon as the sun came up, he went from house to house, gathering up friends and neighbors to help him search the woods. But as they stood at the tree line and prepared to go in, someone cried out, "Wait! There she is!" The crowd fell silent, and the fisherman rushed to the front. He couldn't believe what he saw. There, striding through the trees, was his young wife. On either side of her walked a large furry wolf. The young woman was carrying a large bundle in her arms, wrapped in her cloak. As the young woman and her wolf escort reached the tree line, the wolf stopped, then turned and disappeared back into the forest with one lone howl. The fisherman ran forward to greet his wife and smiled when he heard the cry of a baby rise up from the bundle in her arms. The young woman smiled and pulled back the corner of the cloak to reveal her newborn son. The young couple never forgot their miracle or the wolves that saved the young woman and her baby. In remembrance, they decided to name their son Fenrir, after a great wolf from the legends of their people. That young man would go on to forge his own legends. But we'll save those stories for another day. If you liked this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And make sure you turn on the notification bell. We'll see you in the next story.